Hey, my name's Tom and welcome back to Low Carbon Lifestyle. We've now been living with a heat pump for 3 whole years. We installed it in the summer of 2021 and we've had all the heating and hot water from the heat pump for the last 3 winters. So, in this video, I'm going to give you an overview of what our experience has been living with a heat pump, how much the system has cost to run, how much it cost to install in the first place, and then the lessons that I think I've learned in living with a heat pump for a little while. We may even get the input of my wife to see if my experience has been rose tinted or reality. So let's jump straight into it. Let's start with our home. What kind of house do we live in? Is it a really well insulated home like some people assume you've got to have to live in a heat pump? Well, no, we live in a terraced Victorian property on the edge of Durham in the northeast of England. We think the house was built in the 1870s. It has had some upgrades when we moved in, including double glazing. It has 300mm of loft insulation in the loft, and we built an extension in 2018 to modern building standards. That's about it. This is not a particularly well insulated home, and it still has what I think is the original suspended wooden floors downstairs without any carpets or insulation in the floor. So I think our home is fairly normal when we compare it to many in the UK housing stock. Although we live on a terrace, so we should have next door neighbours in each side, we also live on a hill. So the front and back are exposed to the air, and actually the majority of one side is as well. So, mediocre insulation, average home, and our heat pump has kept us warm in our fairly standard British house for the last 3 years. Our heat pump was commissioned on the 13th of July 2021, and with the heat pump we had heat and electricity metering installed that measures how much heat is delivered and how much electricity has been used by the system. So we've been able to measure heat and electricity for 3 full years now. And we can use that data to understand how much it's costed, how it's impacted on our emissions, and how the changes in the settings that we've made as I've tinkered with it have changed how the system performs over the last few years. So, right, let's get the numbers sorted. In the last year, we've used 3,950 kilowatt hours of electricity to produce 13,836 kilowatt hours of heat. So actually in this last year we've used 90 kilowatt hours more electricity than the year before, but we've actually got 1,665 more kilowatt hours of heat out. We've used a bit more electricity, but we've got a lot more heat out. Overall, that means that for this year the heat pump efficiency has increased from a efficiency of 315, or a COP of 3.15 between 22 and 2023, to a COP or efficiency a COP of 3.5 or efficiency of 350%. So what that means is for every unit of electricity that we've used, we've got 3.5 units of heat out. So between year 2 and 3, our system increased in efficiency by 11%, which is a result. And if we compare to the first year of running our heat pump, our system's now 18% more efficient than it was when we started. A COP of 2.96 versus a COP of 3.5. Okay, so to begin with, let's just think through what might have changed. What have we done differently? Well, to put it simply, we've stopped trying to run our heat pump like a boiler, and we're running it to maximise efficiency. And in doing so, we've made the house much more comfortable for a similar cost. So what do I mean? Well, we used to run a boiler for as little time as possible. An hour in the morning, an hour in the evening. Let's turn it off as soon as we go out. Let's make sure we don't heat an empty house. And in doing this, the house would heat up fairly quickly and then cool down, which meant that sometimes we'd be uncomfortably cold and then maybe too warm. With a heat pump, we could do the same thing. Try to only heat the house at certain times, heat up quickly and turn the heat pump off as quickly as we could. A heat pump can do this if you have it on certain settings, but in doing so you sacrifice heat pump efficiency. And unfortunately, this is kind of how I ran the heat pump for the first winter. Trying to recreate what we had with the boiler, thinking that was more energy efficient. And that gave us an average efficiency or coefficient performance of 2.96. Over the last 2 years, I've started to run the heat pump for longer hours, trying to avoid peaks and troughs, but then getting a higher efficiency. And then finally, this year, over the winter, the heat pump basically ran full time, running at high efficiency, and it meant that we were actually more comfortable. The house was always warm. We used a little bit less electricity, 2% less than in our first year, and a little bit more electricity, 2% more than in our second year. And I'm sure you could tell, we were more comfortable this year than both those first 2 years. So rather than just dumping in loads of heat for a short period of time, what we're doing now is we're trickling in heat all the time. Just enough to keep us comfortable when the temperature changes outside, but no more. And so the heat pump is not working harder than it needs to. We do this by having it on what we call weather compensation, and making sure that weather compensation curve, so that the preset that we set the system to, is as low as we're happy to run it with. So specifically for our Valent Aerotherm Plus system, our first year the curve that we used trying to recreate settings like a boiler was 1.0. This last year we've settled on around 0.5. I wonder what the average heat curve for people with Valent heat pumps is. If you've got a Valent, then do let me know below. So as a side note, a weather compensation curve basically is turning the heat pump down when it doesn't need to work as hard. So if it's 10 degrees outside, it needs to work less hard and deliver less heat than if it's -5 outside. A gas boiler would actually be much more efficient if this was controlled in the same way too, but we tend to just lash in gas boilers as quickly and as cheaply as possible without that additional control. Okay, so we've used more electricity this year, but we've delivered much more heat, so we were much more comfortable. Okay, the key figures that you're interested in: how much does it cost to run? And questions around cost and therefore payback are one of the more common questions I get when talking about heat pumps. So bear with me, because these costs are a little bit nuanced. The last few years we've seen a significant energy crisis, so comparing year on year is probably not that helpful. In 2023, the price cap rate was 34 pence for electricity and over 10 pence for gas. It's come down a little bit since then, it's varied a bit, but for the last few years, heating of any kind has been expensive. When I'm recording this, the price cap is 22.36 pence per kilowatt hour for electricity and 5.48 pence per kilowatt hour for gas. For the 3 months before this current price cap, the rates were 24.5 pence for electricity and 6 for gas. So I'm going to use those previous 3 months figures to estimate how much our heat pump has cost to run over this last year, and compare it with a gas boiler delivering the same amount of heat and therefore the same amount of comfort. Okay, so let's do the maths. Our heat pump had an average efficiency, or average COP, of 3.5, and that means our costs per kilowatt hour of heat would be about 7 pence. So how does this compare to a boiler? Well, assuming that you have a boiler running very efficiently, we could assume that the efficiency of 95%. So every kilowatt hour of gas, you get 0.95 kilowatt hours of heat. This would mean that a boiler would deliver a kilowatt hour of heat at 6.4 pence. So a little bit cheaper than my heat pump at that efficiency at the price cap. And let's just be clear, I've been fairly conservative in that calculation, and maybe biased particularly towards boilers. There'll be many examples of heat pumps running more efficiently than ours, and even more examples of boilers running much less efficiently. If a heat pump was running at an efficiency of 3.85, it would break even with that really efficient 95% gas boiler. Many boilers could even be less than 85% in efficiency, and if we assumed that, our heat pump would have been cheaper to run at the price cap. So, savings for a heat pump are a little bit nuanced, but I think we could say that at a price cap tariff, our heat pump would have had a similar cost to run as a very efficient gas boiler. Much cheaper to run than an old gas boiler. But, and this is maybe an important point to realise, we haven't been on the price cap over the last year. And I've talked about this previously, but we've been on a smart tariff from Octopus Energy. The Agile tariff from Octopus varies in price every single half hour. And one of the things that our modern electricity system means is that we can take advantage of costs changing almost instantaneously. And I found that Octopus's smart tariffs tend to be much cheaper than the price cap when running a heat pump. I'll put my link to sign up to Octopus there if you wanted to switch. So our average rate for all of our electricity over the last 12 months has been 17.28 pence per kilowatt hour. So for us, at our heat pump efficiency of 3.5, our cost per unit of heat was around 4.9 pence. That's 22% lower than a really efficient gas boiler at the price cap for gas over this last 12 months. So to deliver that 13,836 kilowatt hours of heat that we've used in the last 12 months, our costs would have been around £683 compared to the 1,125 in the year before. Ouch. If we'd have used a high efficiency gas boiler, our costs would have been £879 or £196 more for the same comfort. That's a fairly meaningful difference. And we should say we don't have any solar panels, we don't have a battery, we live in a Victorian terrace, and we use a heat pump to heat our home, and it's £196 cheaper to run and more comfortable to live with than a gas boiler. Okay, so that's our example. Our neighbours in the last year actually installed a heat pump too. They installed a heat pump alongside solar panels and a battery, so their costs I think will be much lower. Maybe this is for another more detailed video, but an example using our figures, if we installed a 3.5 kilowatt solar panel system, that probably would fit on our roof. We'd expect to generate around 3,000 kilowatt hours of electricity per year. And let's assume that because we have a heat pump, we'd use 2/3 of that electricity in our house. That would mean that we'd save around £500 over the year. So solar panels generating free power to power our heat pump and therefore free heat. And that would mean that our system would be much cheaper to run than it is today, and much cheaper to run than a gas boiler. If we then added a battery, we might use 90% of what was generated on our roof, which could mean that we have savings of £650 per year. With generation on a roof and then electrified heat, bills could start to get very low indeed. But we don't have solar panels yet, and we're still saving almost £200 compared to an efficient boiler. I should say, whilst we're thinking about costs, there are also smart gas tariffs from Octopus, like the Octopus Gas Tracker. This has given a rate of between 4 and 5 pence for much of this last year. This therefore could mean that a high efficiency gas boiler is similar cost to run as our heat pump on the Agile tariff, but a gas boiler would have much higher emissions. It's all quite nuanced on the cost thing. But let's think about emissions. What about emissions? Well, delivering that 13,800 kilowatt hours of heat, we've used just under 4,000 kilowatt hours of electricity, which would have had emissions associated with it from the grid and from generating that electricity burning gas and big gas power stations of around 820 kilograms per year. To deliver that same amount of heat with a gas boiler, we'd expect to see about 2.6 tonnes of CO2. So our heat pump between 2023 and 2024 reduced our heating emissions by almost 70% and over 1.8 tonnes of CO2. As the electricity grid continues to get cleaner, the heat pump will also get cleaner too. And yes, Octopus Energy says it's got 100% renewable electricity, but you know what? We don't get a green electron through the wire, we just get whatever is delivered. So really we should count the average grid emissions rather than suggesting our electricity is CO2 free. So this is an example of a heat pump heating our Victorian terrace with some double glazing, a small extension and with loft insulation in County Durham, saving money and saving CO2. Saving nearly £200 and saving nearly 2 tonnes of CO2 each year. In more modern homes with better insulation, we're likely to see even cheaper costs to heat with a heat pump. What I should say about costs is that we joined Ripple Energy a while ago and our first energy project is now live. So we're generating electricity through a wind turbine that we've helped pay for, and that's now giving us savings of around 3 pence per kilowatt hour of generation. We didn't invest loads in this Ripple project, but every little helps and will help our heat pump be even cheaper. When the wind blows, the wind turbine that we helped fund will generate some electricity, which will help reduce costs for us. So that's most of the stats linked to running our heat pump. For fullness, the last stat that I often get asked about is the install cost. This system in 2021 cost about £11,000 to put in. And that's to install the heat pump, the water tank, and replace radiators, as well as the control system, the electrical installation, all that kind of stuff. We were actually part of a research project run through the Energy Systems Catapult, so we didn't actually pay that money at all. It was funded by E.ON, the energy company. We were really lucky. And the project with Energy Systems Catapult over the whole country demonstrated that heat pumps can heat a wide variety of homes. Have a look at the results in this page that I'll post below. In some ways, I make these videos to pay back how fortunate that we have been in getting a free install. But the costs for our installation, it may have gone up a bit in the last few years with inflation, etc. The microgeneration certification scheme says that an average heat pump installation is now around £13,000. This would usually come with the grant from the boiler upgrade scheme of £7,500. So our system from 3 years ago would therefore have cost £3,500. An average system today might be £5,500. And we're paying that to save a little bit of money, to improve comfort a significant amount, but to significantly reduce emissions. Okay, moving on from the cost to run or the cost to install, moving on from the finances, I think that living with a heat pump really does change your understanding of what they are and how they work. I mean, I knew the theory of how they worked and what they were doing before we had one, but my approach to using it has changed completely after living with it. So what is it that I've learned? Well, I think I've been surprised that I've settled on running a heat pump constantly. But the more I think about it, the more it makes sense. Keeping a house at a constant temperature will have slightly higher heat loss than when we let it cool overnight or when we're out. But to lift that temperature back to a comfortable level, if we've let it cool, will mean using a similar amount of energy. There is a small amount of wasted heat in running a heat pump all the time during the winter, but with the much better efficiency, we're actually conserving electrical energy. And the heat isn't really wasted. It's just moved. It leaks out the house through the walls, the floor, the roof, and it's recycled by the heat pump. When we burn gas as a fuel, that would be wasted. Gas boilers are single-use heat, whereas heat pumps recycle heat. So that's one of my main lessons learnt, and it's felt kind of counterintuitive. Have a warmer house, and in doing so, increase efficiency and lower costs. So are we happy with our heat pump? Do we have any regrets? Well, having learned a little bit about heat pump efficiency through videos on YouTube and through engaging people on Twitter and just thinking about it more broadly, if I was going to do this all again, I might have asked for some bigger radiators or for some more radiators. That would mean I could get the flow temperature of our system down that little bit more and get the efficiency of the system that little bit higher. I might have changed the bathroom towel radiator to a bigger version of a towel radiator. But if I'm honest, I'm pushing myself a little bit here. Do I regret getting a heat pump in general? Well, not at all. This has been the single biggest step in reducing our emissions at home, and I'm thrilled to be able to tell people all about it. But the most important question, what does Esther think? So this is my wife Esther. Do you remember what the anniversary was a couple of days ago?
Is that our wedding anniversary?
It was 10 years of dating.
10 years of dating.
And it was also the same day as 3 years of having a heat pump. Very special occasion. Tell me what you think about the heat pump. Have you noticed? What do you think about living with a heat pump? Is there anything you've noticed in particular?
So I work from home, and I used to be freezing at home all the time.
Because I was a bit of a Scrooge with the gas boiler.
Yeah. But I would say since heat pump arrived through the winter, I'm a lot warmer. I guess the house is at an even, steady temperature rather than being like big spikes and getting like warm for an hour and then getting freezing. So all positive from me.
Okay. Maybe I've not been making it up all this time. So, what do you reckon? Over the last year, we've saved around £196 to heat with a heat pump on a smart tariff from Octopus Energy. If we assume an installation cost after the boiler upgrade scheme of between £3,500 and £5,500, then we still don't have much of an attractive payback, a simple calculation would suggest around 18 to 25 years. But when we're investing in our home for more than just the money, a simple payback doesn't really make sense. We need to consider the nearly 2 tons of CO2 that we've saved and the path to zero carbon that the installation makes as well. For most people, we only have one option to decarbonise our heating, and simply put, that is installing a heat pump. So we need to make a plan, and then at some point we need to get it done. Over these last 3 years, I've been really pleased with the impact talking about this little box has had. Over 500,000 views on YouTube, an article in Bloomberg where I got called an energy nerd. Over 30 people have visited our heat pump, including on a day through the Visit a Heat Pump scheme. I've had conversations with people across my community about heat pumps and with others via Zoom. And I hope therefore that I've had a multiplier effect that happens when we talk to each other about change. Making these videos has helped me understand how to communicate more clearly on decarbonisation, and that helps in my day job too. So I reckon doing these videos has been worthwhile. That's plenty of blowing my own trumpet. Thank you for watching, and if you have any questions, feel free to comment below or reach out to me directly. I'd love to talk things through. And finally, I should shout out Richard from the Upside Down Fork channel, who heard some of my poor audio and saw some of my frustration with trying to get audio right on YouTube. And he sent me this snazzy microphone. So I hope the sound on my videos will improve from here. Big thank you to Richard. Do subscribe to Upside Down Fork as well. He's done loads of videos about his heat pump, his solar panels, and much more. Really, really good guy on YouTube. Okay.